This episode of Brains on Games is about hegemony. Let's find out if a game about civics can be fun. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to talk about Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. Now, this is a game that's just delivering to Kickstarter backers now, so that's how I got my hands on it. This is the extended deluxe edition of the game, and I did add metal coins to it, so the retail version might look different from this, but it's delivered to backers, which means it should be more widely available very soon. It is a political science and economic game, and it's got a really thick rule book, and there's even a book of concepts, and it's like a textbook of the concepts that are being used to develop the game mechanics and how they translated governmental and economic and political science concepts into the game. It's a game that I think should be looked at by folks who are majoring in civics or political science. So Nate Anderson, there's a shout out to you. You need to play this thing. But let's talk in more detail about Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. Now, I will say this is a first look because this is a long game. I've only been able to play this thing once at a 2-player count. So this is a first look, and I want to play it again. So there's a little spoiler alert for you. Hegemony is a game for between 1 and 4 players. You can play this thing solo. It's a game that works for kids age 14 and up, but it's complicated enough that if you're playing with 14-year-olds, they better be familiar with modern advanced strategic board games. And it's a game that plays anywhere between 90 minutes and 3 hours. Our first game at a 2-player count took 4 hours to finish. And they were 4 hours that I enjoyed, but it did take 4 hours. So this is a long one. Let's take a first look at Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. You can see part of the board here. Hegemony is a heavy strategy game. Heavy enough that it comes with a rule book. It comes with double-sided individual rule sheet for each of the player classes and an extra cheat sheet for each of the player classes on top of that, and a general cheat sheet for everyone's turn, and what is basically a textbook of the economic and political science concepts and how they were translated into game mechanics. So this is a game that really is trying to recreate some real world events and some real world governmental kinds of concepts. It's a game that maybe should be studied in high school civics classes or university political science classes. And unfortunately, I can only show you a little bit of the board. This board is huge. And then there are stacks of cards that go around it and stacks of resources. And you can see that there are lots of little tokens. This is a strike token. The worker class can put their workers on strike. You've got health tokens, which look like this, and clinics and public hospitals are going to produce these health tokens. There's education tokens that are produced by colleges and universities. There are luxury tokens as well. And of course, you need food, so you need to have some farms in this game also. What you're trying to do in this game, and like I said, it is heavy, it is complicated. I looked up some how to play videos before I played this game, and they were over an hour long. So this is a complicated game. Now, I will be honest with you, the reason why they're over an hour is that it's an asymmetric game. So each player is going to play a different class, and each of the classes works completely differently. Your goal in this game is to have the most victory points at the end of the 5 rounds, but each player earns those victory points in completely different ways. The worker class is trying to earn prosperity for their workers and grow their population. The capitalists are trying to earn the most money to make the most profit. The middle class has to balance both of those things. They have workers to look after, and they have corporations that they can open, and the state is kind of trying to keep everybody happy. So it's a game where each player has their own complicated set of things that they can do. Each player has their own deck of cards that will allow them to take actions, and each player is going to be earning victory points on this track here that goes all the way around the outside of the board. They're going to move their little screen printed wooden counters up there, and the way that they earn those points is completely different. So what we found in our first playthrough of the game is that as the game got going, the worker class player, so if you're playing at a 2-player count, one is going to be the worker class and the other is going to be the capitalist, and then you add middle class at 3 players, you add the state only at 4 players. So there's a bunch of different things that will take place once the state is added. But the worker class is going to earn points primarily during their turn, where they're educating their workers and increasing their worker population. They're adding prosperity by purchasing luxury items, by purchasing healthcare and education. And so we found that the worker would be jumping ahead during their turn, and then the capitalist class was only earning those points at the end once they counted up how much profit that they made during that turn. And like I said, you can only see a little bit of the board here. There's a lot going on here, but it does make it fairly clear once you've played through a game. Now, like I said, it took us 4 hours to play. That's partly because things that normally experienced players who are familiar with the game could do a number of things simultaneously. We were doing everything separately to really wrap our heads around what was happening in the game. So sort of like when I played 11, we were watching the story unfold as we played, rather than just kind of each individually doing our own thing. I'm not going to spend an hour doing a how to play video on this thing. Suffice to say, you're going to have these action cards, and each player has their own deck, and they are super thematic. Some cards have certain requirements so they can only be played if certain other things are happening at the board in terms of the fiscal policy or the welfare state. Is healthcare free? If healthcare is free, certain cards can be played. If you have to pay for education, certain cards can be played, but not if education is being provided by the state. So you might have cards in the worker class like a labor market deregulation. You might be trying to highlight social issues or give state scholarships. Meanwhile, in the capitalist class, you've got offshore companies. This was such an important card. This was really helpful for me. Just on one turn, there was only one of these that came up in the game that we played, but it allowed me to move my profits offshore so I didn't have to pay taxes on them. It's so realistic, and we did find ourselves referring to one another as socialists or capitalist pigs because I didn't want to pay all the extra wages that the worker class wanted. Anyway, it was quite an enthusiastic couple of hours once we figured out the game. There was a bit of trash talk going on back and forth between my friend and I. So you're going to play those super thematic cards. You're going to potentially take the action that's at the bottom of that card, but you could also discard a card to take some basic action, and each class has its own set of basic actions. You could sell a corporation. I played as the capitalist class just because of the way the board was set up and where I was sitting. That was the easiest one for me to pick. You could sell a corporation or start a new corporation or change wages. There are a number of none of your cards are wasted. So if you don't want to use the action on the card, or you can't use it because the requirements aren't met, you could still discard that card and take that basic action, and then you get a free action, which might be changing the cost of the resources that you're producing in your companies. One of the interesting things about this game that sort of gets you thinking ahead about hand management is that each player is going to have a hand of 7 cards, but you play only 5 cards in the round and you save the other 2 cards for the next round. So you might be thinking, do I want to burn this card? I can't use it right now, but maybe I'll be able to use it next turn, or it's going to give me a greater benefit in the next turn. If I'm not making very much revenue in a turn because wages are super high, then I might be saving that offshore the offshore company's card for a later turn when I've got lots and lots of money on the revenue side of my player board. Once you've played 5 out of your 7 cards, then you're going to start production. It's kind of the end of the turn, and you're going to start seeing the impact of the things that you did during your turn. So the corporation cards look like this. Some of them are state-run companies, so you're going to start with 3 state-run companies and 3 capitalist companies in the 2-player game that we played. You might have a public hospital instead of a for-profit hospital. Where are my corporations here? I had a medical clinic, and what you can see on these cards is that you need a certain number of workers to make this corporation operational. So in this case, you need a health specialist. Those meeples are white, and you need an unskilled worker as well. Down at the bottom, there are 3 different wages that you could pay those workers. And up here in the labor market, that's going to dictate the minimum wage. So you can't go below the minimum wage, but you might give your workers a wage or give them a bonus in order to keep them working at that company and to prevent them from going on strike. You might have a mall or a supermarket. Those are all going to produce different things. So if you've got the right workers on here and you've paid their wages, you're going to produce these for food, say, at the supermarket. And the wages, like I said, are dictated here by the labor market. This is the minimum wage, so everything has to be at level 2. That's right in the middle at the start of the game. So I'm going to pay the workers here 20 coins. And the coins are great. In this game, so much better than the little cardboard tokens. They're really nice, hefty, good-looking coins, and they've got denominations at 50 and even 100. So the components in the deluxeified version of the game are really fun. One of the things that you can do on your turn, this gets resolved after you've done all your production, you've paid all of your wages, then you're going to resolve the bills that were proposed during your turn. So there are cards in your decks that are going to allow you to propose some bills. You can discard a card to propose a bill. And what does that mean, to propose a bill? That means you're trying to change the way that the counters are laid out here in these 7 spaces. So there's 7 different things that you could vote on. You might want to increase immigration in order to have more workers coming in at the beginning of every turn. And so if I wanted to propose a bill about that, I would put my little counter here at the bottom to get a +2 on that immigration. Maybe if you are in the worker class, you might want free healthcare, for example. That's going to increase taxes by quite a bit, but you could put your voting token over here if you propose that bill. And then the votes. This was one of the most tense parts of the game. It was always exciting. But what you're doing here is you've got this bag that has counters in it. So you've got this cloth bag that says Hegemony on the front of it. And I should say, here's a game that's so complicated. Not only does it have a textbook, I had to look up the meaning of the word hegemony, but you've got a bag that has counters in the player color. So if I reach in here, you're going to see there's some worker tokens, there's some middle class tokens that I put in the bag. And during your turn, there are cards that allow you to manipulate what tokens are in that bag before the votes happen. So during my turn, I might get to play a fake news card, for example, and dump some, take some tokens out and dump some that are in my color. I might be able to add 3 tokens because of special interest groups or something like that. So there are a number of ways that you can get extra tokens in the bag. Before you start drawing tokens out for the votes, you're going to add tokens to your bag based on the number of your population if you're the worker class, or the number of corporations that are active. You cut that in half and add that number of counters to the bag, and then you start drawing tokens out. So you've got, here's the capitalist one. So this might show that I am not in favor of healthcare being free, or I am in favor of increasing immigration, right? Whatever the vote is. So before the vote starts, you're going to say whether you're for or against, and then you're going to draw 5 of these tokens out of the bag, and you're putting them on the board where it says yay or nay. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. I'll put some graphics up of the game board. We took lots of pictures as we were playing. So you're going to say yay or nay. After that gets resolved, once you've drawn the 5 tokens, maybe there's a tie. The tie goes to the person who proposed the bill. Then you can spend some influence to manipulate the vote even further. And this was fun as well. Throughout the course of the game, you may be buying influence from the state, or you might even be producing influence through your own media corporations. So if I've got media corporations that have employees in it, maybe every turn I'm earning 2 or 3 of these little purple tokens. How you spend them is, once the vote is decided, players all have to say how many of these tokens they have, and then they secretly bid a certain amount to add that counter to their side of the vote. So if I've got 3 or 4 of these, I could bid all of them to make sure that my vote goes through, but there might be multiple votes. I might want to save some. So it was a really tense and interesting part of the game. Once the vote's resolved, you move these counters around however they're supposed to go, and then that may wind up changing the tax rate that the corporation has to pay once they've paid all of their employees. And then play continues like that for 5 rounds. So at the end of 5 rounds, then that's going to get to the end game scoring. You're going to earn some extra points depending on how things are laid out on the board. And then the player with the most victory points is going to be the winner. What skills are you exercising by playing a game like Hegemony? Lead your class to victory. This is a game that heavily involves the executive functioning skills. You are planning ahead. You are budgeting and doing that hand management, budgeting your actions. You're budgeting your resources, because you have to buy healthcare. You have to make sure, the working class has to make sure that there's enough food to feed the population. The capitalist class has to make sure they have enough money to pay their employees. They might have to sell a company if the wages are going too high. So there's a lot of executive functioning involvement here, those skills that you need to work towards a goal, to be efficient in managing your actions. You also have to keep in mind, one of the executive functioning skills is working memory. And working memory is like the whiteboard in your mind, where you keep information so that you can do something with it. This is how you juggle information and keep multiple things in mind all at the same time. And all of the things that you're doing in this game have multiple impacts and multiple implications for all of the players. For example, if I'm in the working class and there are a bunch of corporations and I raise the minimum wage, it's quite possible that the capitalist player then is going to start selling corporations to cover the difference. If taxes are going to go up, that means that the capitalist class might be changing the way that they're doing things. I know one of the things that happened in our game is that the working class player maybe made a mistake and he went on strike, but it was the supermarket that went on strike. He wanted me to raise wages in the supermarket. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to propose a bill that's going to increase the tariffs on food, and it's going to make it more expensive for you to buy them. And I'm not going to have that food because my supermarket's not going to produce if the workers there are on strike. So I was able to kind of get my revenge for his workers going on strike. But each action has an impact on all of the other players. And I think that's especially true when you're playing with all 4 and the state is trying to keep everything in balance. There is also some negotiation and compromise that's happening here in this game. Now, we weren't able to do that very much at the beginning of our game that we played because we were still learning how to play. But by the time we got past the halfway point, now all of a sudden, I might be saying to the other player, look, keep the wages the way that they are, and I'm going to open up this health clinic so that you can place your healthcare workers somewhere and they're not going to be stuck in the unemployment section of the board. Maybe he's going to want that health clinic to open up so that he can place a worker, he can start a trade union. There are unions in this game that are going to give him points and influence. So everything I do can benefit the other player, and everything the other player does is going to have some impact on me. So I have to pay to put a corporation out, but that gives the other players a place to put their workers so that they'll earn some wages. I pay those wages to those workers, but then they're buying the resources back from me, maybe from the state, but also from me. And so the money's all going back and forth. There's a real distribution of wealth that's happening here, but every action has an impact on the others. So we did find ourselves sometimes saying, okay, Don't do that on this turn because next turn I'm going to do this, or I'll make a deal. If you don't do that, then I'll do. So there is an opportunity for negotiation and compromise that you don't always see in strategy games. So we certainly like the diplomacy aspect of it, and you get to exercise those social skills. Finally, I mean, there's a lot here that's all about economics and political science. And you do start to recognize as you play how complex and interconnected some of these systems are. And so there's that specific knowledge area that maybe gives you an appreciation for some of those, taxation, free healthcare. That would be great for everyone to have free healthcare, but it's going to cost more in taxes. And how's that going to impact? It gets you thinking. It might get, your teenagers or even university students talking about, free education and how that might impact things. You could play that out there. There might be scenarios that you could work through with the game, and then you might be looking at that. If you do decide that you're curious about those things, all of the concepts are in this little encyclopedia here. And like I said, translated into, they explain how they translated those into game concepts for the game. Final thoughts about Hegemony. Well, this is a game that has artwork that I really like, and cards that are very thematic. The components, especially if we're talking about these metal coins, there's just some satisfaction when you're playing with those. And you've got denominations up to 100, which is great. And those were a big hit. The other player who was there with me I don't think he's played that many games with those metal coins. And so he really thought that those were, and they're satisfying to play with those coins. The dual layer player boards are great. You can see they're a little bit warped. I may have to put a book on top of them to flatten them out. But the player boards are great. The board itself does keep things organized. And, even down to the hand management, I did like that idea that I've got 7 cards, I can save 2. So then you're starting to think ahead to the next hand or the hand after that. It gives you some planning. I liked how everything was interconnected, and I needed to do certain things that I would do would benefit me, but they're also going to allow other players to get some benefit from that. Like I said, the interconnectedness, raising the minimum wage was a big thing in our game. That made things a lot more expensive for me, and I was like, oh, if you're going to do that, that's going to mess all of my plans up. And there were some turns where, I lost money. I didn't make any profit. I had to go right into my capital instead of just the revenue for that turn. So I didn't earn anything, no victory points. And so I had to start thinking more carefully about making sure that I had enough money coming in, not just to cover the wages, but to cover the taxes. You pay taxes in this game as well. And every choice had some impact, and it didn't just have an impact on one player. It wasn't everybody building their own engine. You are building an engine partially, but that engine is being used by the other players too. Making those deals was really important towards the end. You wanted to avoid strikes. We wanted to make sure that there weren't so many unemployed workers that they would demonstrate, and that's going to have an impact on the game too. When you play with the state, there are events that happen, and the cards look like broadcast news, and some news event is happening that the players have to deal with. It is a game that I think, in high school civics classes, you could play a game like this and get the kids talking or thinking about those concepts. I talked about the coins. I didn't even show you really the meeples. The worker class meeples, well, they have different colors for different specializations, and then the unskilled workers are gray. But the working class meeples have little overalls on. The middle class ones are a little bit taller, and it looks like they're wearing maybe a lab coat or a suit jacket or something. So the meeples the screen printed meeples are great. The screen printed counters that keep track of your votes, of the bills that you're proposing. So many things about this game are fantastic. Now, it is, though, if there are downsides, this is a long game and it's quite complicated. It would be intimidating, I think, for most players. I opened it up and saw those rule books. It was a little intimidating for me. And then I thought, well, now I have to teach someone else how to play this game. So it's not one of those ones. We've talked lately maybe about some games where they're strategic, but they're super easy to explain. This one's not like that. Very, very strategic, difficult to explain, I would say. It's a game where, because there are those 4 different roles, I think it's going to play best with 4 players, but that's going to make the game even longer. We did find, once we kind of got the hang of our roles, that it would have been interesting to have a middle class and the state player in that game. But I think that those roles are going to need to be taken by the more experienced players, because they're required to balance more things, and it's quite, the roles I think are quite unusual, where you've got the middle class who's keeping track both of corporations and workers, and then the state is trying to keep everyone balanced. So those are quite different. And it's a table hog. You need a big space. You only saw a little tiny piece of the board here. The board is big. We needed every single inch almost of the 6x4 foot table that we played on. So you need lots of room to play this one. Now I understand from hearing from other people who have played the game that sometimes there are weird things that might happen based on different card interactions. We didn't experience anything like that. There were a couple of times where a rule could be interpreted maybe more than one way, but it is the first edition, so your mileage may also vary on that one. A couple of cards were a little hard to figure out, and we just sort of had to make rulings on them so that we wouldn't be stuck for a long time thinking about that. But this is a game that has been in my head since I played it. All the ways that things interact and the different, because we were just learning, and it's so complex, because we were just learning it, because we only got to try it with a couple of the roles instead of all 4, because there are, this might be a little reflective when I hold it up, I didn't even open up this expansion that has historical events in here. There are also hidden agendas that each player could have. There are other modules that could have been added to the game that we didn't. We played the basic game, but it wasn't very basic. And so all I can think about since is, oh, now I want to play again. Now that I know how these systems interact with one another, now that I know how the import duties work, now that there's so many things that now I want to try, and I want to see the other decks of cards and maybe play a solo. Anyway, this is a game that really appealed to the part of me that likes to play those heavier games. I don't think it would hit the table very often with my kids, I'll be honest, because it's so complicated and long. I talked to my son about it, and he thought it sounded really, really cool, but he said, I play those long games, and maybe I play for 3 hours, and by the end of 3 hours, now I've started to figure it out, and then I have to spend another 3 hours now that I know how to play. Like, those hard games are hard to get him to sit down for. So it is long, it is complicated, but it's in my heart right now. It's in my head, and I've been thinking about it ever since. As I said, the components are great. The interlocking systems are great. The fact that it's about political science and I have to play it with Nate Anderson is great. This is a game that we enjoyed, but I think it's unique enough that it's going to be one that's going to require a certain kind of a crowd to be able to enjoy it. And it might take a playthrough before you feel like you've figured out the systems enough to really enjoy all the things that you can do with it. So for us, this is a winner. And I think it's one of those games where it's an educational game, but the balance is definitely in favor of the game as opposed to education. So you're not reading a whole bunch of text, except the rules are, small print, and you really do have to read those. But once you get past the rules and you figure out the iconography, it's one where our turns were going faster by the end. And as I said, I want to play it again. I want to try some longer term strategic planning. I want to do more of those negotiations. I want to try it with 4 players. I have a feeling in order to do that, I'm going to have to book a boardroom at my office building and have people come over to try it. But what a game, what an experience. And what do we want to do when we play games? We want to have an interesting experience, and this was not just interesting. I found it really fun. I found it very engaging, but I'm also a guy who can sit through a 4-hour board game. So if you have any questions about Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory, if you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comments section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. The previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed. So we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.